Good afternoon, guys. How are you all doing? Welcome back to my channel. We are changing the topic a little bit. So you'll know for the last 5 vlogs, I think, we've definitely been talking about the horses in World War I. And I thought we need a bit of a change. So it took me quite some time to find a topic that really grabbed me. Sometimes I just read through things and I'm like, I'm not really in the mood for that this week. And then, you know, later on I'll be interested in it. But I couldn't quite find something that really caught my eye until I saw an unusual job role for a horse. And that was to pull the bathing machines. And I was like, what's that? And as I quite often say, I'm embarrassed to say, I didn't know what that was. So off I went to Google to have a bit of a search and yeah, landed on the topic of the horses that pulled the bathing machines. So that's what we're going to talk about. I will just mention quickly first, I've literally only just researched this, so it's still very fresh in my mind, which is always good. The previous vlog, which I've yet to record, I will probably record straight after this. I'm going to be wearing the same clothes, guys. So if you're thinking, does she ever change her clothes? That's why I recorded it all on the same day. So yeah, just thought I'd let you know, just in case you were thinking, I'm sure she had that on last time. Initially, and how wrong I was, thought, oh, perhaps this wasn't such a bad job for horses, you know, in this time period, which was sort of 18th century to very early 20th century when the bathing machines were in use. You know, horses had a tough life, you know, they worked incredibly hard, they weren't treated particularly well, and most of the jobs they did weren't particularly pleasant. And I thought, well, you know, working on the beach, how bad could that be? But actually it really wasn't a very nice job, and we'll get onto that a little bit later. So the horse's job was simply to pull the bathing machine out into the sea and then pull it back in from the sea. And if you don't know what a bathing machine was, I'd say it was a little bit of a cross between a beach hut and like a changing facility all on wheels. I think it looked like a beach hut. And so, yes, it could be easily manoeuvred in and out of the sea. And it was where someone could go and get changed from their everyday attire into their bathing suit, or if you were a man in this period, naked, because they didn't tend to wear anything back then, because this was a time where you weren't to see each other in your swimming attire. So beaches back then, they would often sort of be split. So females would swim at one end of the beach, males would swim at the other end, because the two must not see each other. And I actually think this was a really clever design, the bathing machine, because, you know, you would get into the bathing machine, you would get changed into your, let's say you're a woman, into your bathing suit. The driver would send the horse out into the sea. He would probably turn around, so the horse was facing back towards the beach. And then the occupant of the bathing machine would then very kind of privately sort of come into the sea, and they would be fairly deep, so the aim was that no one saw your body by your head, and some of them were very luxurious because they had these sort of umbrella canopies that would kind of come over and down into the water, so you had ultimate privacy getting into the water. And so, yeah, you could go in. Now, back then, they didn't really go in the sea for swimming purposes. Most of the time, it was for sort of therapeutic problems. So for any illnesses and stuff, this was a real period where it felt like salt water would really help you, cleanse you, make you better. And actually, there was a thing about having these kind of ritual dunkings in the water, and you had like attendants that would help you. They were called dippers. And so obviously women would have female dippers and men would have male dippers to help them, and they would sort of help do the dunkings, which I think sounds like great fun, you know, with the stranger that's just, you know, paid to go out into the water and you're there giving them a dunk in it. I thought, oh, that's quite good fun, isn't it? I think it's genius. I love the idea that, you know, you could go and have a little sort of lay in the sea, you were quite blocked from the shore of the way, like I say, the way the bathing machine was sort of parked up, so onlookers couldn't see you. So you should feel fairly private. I don't know, like at one point, how many bathing machines would have been in the water. So I'm thinking, like, could you see the person next to you who was having a bathe as well? I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't an issue. You know, you could see each other's heads. That was absolutely fine. It was the rest of you weren't allowed to see. I have no idea how long people chose to spend out in the seawater, whether it was literally a few minutes or whether they were out there for 15, 20 minutes. I couldn't find any facts on that. But if we look at the horses, we'll see that actually for them it wasn't that much fun, because most of the time, if they pulled the bathing machine out into the water, they then parked up out in the sea and had to wait. And that amount of salt water on their legs wasn't a good thing. And I read that, and of course they weren't drinking the water, but even just stood in the seawater, the body sort of, it went into the skin, it was sort of absorbed. That caused even worse dehydration for the horses. That caused an imbalance in electrolytes, and actually like organ failure in the end. And when you add on the sun and the heat in summer, heat stroke was a real issue for these horses, because when they weren't out in the sea, they were just on the beach, just tied up, a group of them waiting in the sun. I mean, absolutely horrific for them, the thought of it. I mean, I suppose it's not much different to the beach donkeys. Awful, absolutely awful. And I read quite a few newspaper articles from, you know, the 1800s, and there was severe neglect of these horses. They were abused. There were lots of people writing in who were genuinely worried about them, you know, saying that their legs were very swollen, that these horses were very skinny. Quite often, and I read several articles of this, horses would get panicked on the beach, because the beaches were really, I mean, the beaches are noisy nowadays, but not like they were back then. You know, the beach was, back then, was somewhere that lots of things were being sold. It was really loud, there was music playing, and these horses got frightened, panicked, bolted with the bathing machines on the back, and seriously injured people who got in their way. And also, if someone happened to be in the back, also they could possibly would have got injured. So it was a really frightening place for horses. I would have imagined they were more likely to pick older horses, perhaps horses that were, I've said before, maybe horses that were coming towards the end of their life, because they wouldn't have been doing fast work, but they were having to stand out in the heat for most of the day. And actually, they did this job all year round. I assumed it was just sort of spring and summer months, but no. Supposedly, Victorians would choose to go out into the sea even in winter. Crazy people. But it wasn't a nice job for horses at all. Not pleasant in the slightest. And there would have been times where trying to get the bathing machine back in from the sea, and if the sea was quite choppy and the waves were quite high, that would have been quite an effort for the horse to get that back in. And I did again read other newspaper articles of people dying in the bathing machines, because if the waves were too high, they'd crash into it, and they were only like wooden framed kind of huts on wheels. They weren't very strong, and some of them were just canvas as well, so it wouldn't have taken much to sort of knock them over, and people drowned in them. Theft was quite an issue with them, so when they went out into the water, people would obviously take their belongings off, take their jewellery off, and while they were having a dip in the sea, thieves would try and clamber up and get in and nick their money and their jewellery, so not great. They kind of started to go out of fashion in the late 1800s, when we started mixing a little bit more on the beach, and we weren't quite so concerned about people seeing our bodies in beachwear. They started to go out of fashion. So I'd already started editing the video, and I realised I missed out a really interesting fact. So Queen Victoria had her own bathing machine, of course she did, and I've got plenty of pictures because it's since been restored. But when she died, it got turned into a chicken coop, which I think is blinking brilliant. I just think what a fantastic chicken coop that was. Thankfully it was found, and as I say, it had been restored back to its former glory. And I believe you can go and see it on the Isle of Wight. But I love that. But yes, she had her own bathing machine as well. Now, I don't know if it's still there. I should have double checked this before I started filming. But supposedly at the Weymouth beach on the seafront, there is a replica bathing machine that George III had. Should have double checked whether it's still there. I'm going to assume it is. A very beautiful white, as I like to say, sort of beach hut on wheels. I mean, they did just look like beach huts, don't they? You would have seen them in this period of time up and down the country on the UK's beaches. You also saw them abroad. You saw them in America, you saw them in France, you saw them in Germany. And I think they were a very clever design. And if you took horses out of the equation, I think we should have them back, personally. I like the idea of, getting wheeled out into one. You could sit on the steps of one and just dangle your feet in the sea. I mean, the only problem is I suppose the horses were quite a good anchor when backing them out into the sea. Obviously, they didn't go super deep, but they had to go deep enough that you could sort of limber your way out and down to the steps, like I say, without anyone seeing your body. But yeah, I quite like the idea of one. I think it's a good idea. I believe to hire one back then would have cost you about, I don't know, £1.70, £1.80 in today's money. And I believe was used by all types of people, from the royal family to your everyday person who could afford it. So yeah, so a very interesting job for horses. Again, not one that's necessarily very positive and doesn't really have huge amounts of happy stories when you read the newspaper articles on it from this period of time. And I assume they would have lived in the sort of seaside town somewhere. There would have been some stable yard nearby, but it would have been a pretty hard job. And again, didn't really find out much about what type of horses they were using and the lives these horses led, but I assume, they've been working 6 days a week. I don't know if this would have been available on a Sunday. I'm going to assume not. And yeah, in summer, particularly hard, but then in winter, equally hard, because if the weather's revolting and they're having to wait on the beach in case some person feels the need to go and dip in the sea for therapeutic reasons, either way, these horses had a pretty hellish job. So yeah, I'm really would like a very positive story soon. Something where you think, oh, that was nice, not sort of so much sad times, which I think is currently what I seem to be finding every time I research a new topic. But I guess that's what comes with history and, yeah, how we treated horses back then. Anyway, I don't want to finish on a really gloomy note. That sounded so sort of depressing, but it's it is hard to read sometimes, isn't it? But yeah, a very interesting subject nevertheless. And I hope you enjoyed them. We should have a fair amount of good pictures. I've got to edit it yet, but I think I found quite a few online, so that always helps. I will see you guys next time for another historical horses topic.